From Nikola Jokic not getting to do the three-peat, to the likes of Kevin Durant and Steph Curry missing out due to injury, here are the NBA players that were snubbed for this year's MVP. And what better player to start with than the runner-up himself, Nikola Jokic. Now, don't get me wrong, this video isn't gonna follow the Kendrick Perkins school of thought. Joel Embiid definitely deserved the MVP, given his amazing performances, and I'll get to that in a bit. But the NBA has 30 teams, and all of those teams have at least one fantastic performer every season. Out of those 25 to 30 players, picking just one for the MVP award is always going to cause controversy of some type. Nikola Jokic, though, is one of the few players who can truly feel like he got snubbed. Why? Well, the man was a couple of dimes away from averaging a triple-double for the season. Do you know how crazy that is? I'll tell you. It's so crazy, only two other players in NBA history have accomplished it. Oscar Robertson, way back in the early 60s, and Russell Westbrook. Yes, the very same Russ that most of you fans have been slamming all season long. And he's the only player to do it on more than one occasion, by the way. Now, Jokic did miss out on the triple-double, but you've got to factor in the reason, right? He did not play the last dozen games or so of the regular season, because his team had the first seed on lock, and the Serbian superstar was more concerned about doing something in the playoffs, rather than stat padding. Not to mention, he also didn't care much about the award. Oh yeah, Jokic couldn't care less about the MVP. And before you say that this is something a loser would say, allow me to explain that Nikola's won the MVP award 2 consecutive times in the last 2 seasons. He was very much in line to win it for the 3rd successive time. But like I said, he's not concerned about statistics and records. The man wants a ring. And given the way he's playing in the postseason right now, he might just get it. Back to the snub though. Even after missing the last few games of the regular season, there are valid enough reasons to say that Jokic would have been worthy of a 3rd successive MVP. Why? Simply because he led the Denver Nuggets to the best record in the Wild Wild West. And his stature was an outrageous 24.5, 11.8, 9.8. I didn't round off the figures so that you know just how close he was to a triple-double, all the while taking his team to the top spot in the West. That said, Joel Embiid was a worthy winner too. I mean, come on, you can talk all you want about voter fatigue playing a part in denying Jokic a three-peat of MVP awards, but in Joel Embiid, you've got someone who's been easily the most dominant player in the league. For 3 successive seasons now, Jokic is a cheat code, but that doesn't mean Embiid isn't one either. 2-time scoring champion, beast on the defensive end, and the consistency to keep going even after being denied the MVP award for 2 consecutive seasons. He deserved it, like it or not. The likes of Stephen A. Smith talked about how Embiid will be a deserving winner, because he was doing it all in the Eastern Conference, which has been arguably tougher this season than the West. Sure, he may not have the best record in the East, but the Philadelphia 76ers relied more on Embiid than any other team relied on their superstar. But if the East is genuinely tougher, then how can you possibly deny Giannis Antetokounmpo a 3rd MVP after what he did this season? The last 3 MVP races have gone down to the wire between Jokic and Embiid. Statistically speaking, there's a lot to say that it was deserved too. But voter fatigue is a very real phenomenon, folks. If it wasn't, I'd argue that Giannis could easily be sitting on his 4th MVP award by now. After all, he's the victim of exactly what happened to Jokic this season. Fans and analysts simply got bored with giving the award to the same man again and again, when in hindsight, it's a travesty. He's been the best player in the league for nearly 5 extremely dominant years now. As good as both Jokic and Embiid are, you can't compare them to Giannis's level. He's on a different level altogether. He's in that all-time great conversation now, and is more concerned with racking up rings than MVP titles. However, if the NBA voting was on a fair and level playing field, Giannis would have been a deserved winner of the award 100%. The Greek Freak had his best scoring season, averaging over 30 points for the first time in his career. He's improved his defensive production as of late too. And while Embiid and Jokic write insane statistics for themselves, Giannis is actually getting better with every passing season. His ceiling is also considerably higher than the pair of centers fighting it out for the MVP. But the Bucks star wasn't even considered a close favorite. It's absurd when you see how he was ever present for Milwaukee and led them to the best record in the league. And just behind them were the Celtics, led by Jason Tatum. When the season began, he really looked like someone who'd run away with the MVP award. Unfortunately for the Celtics star, Boston's season has taken a nosedive since the turn of the year. And at one point, they were in danger of losing out on the second seed to Philadelphia as well. Luckily for last year's finalists, they hung on. But more than luck, it was Jason Tatum pulling the strings that kept the C's in the hunt for the top seed. His statistics weren't as impressive as those of players like Embiid or Jokic. But when you talk about two-way play, there aren't many players better than Tatum. Up until the beginning of the year, the 25-year-old was hailed as the favorite for the MVP award. And even though he fell off by the end of the regular season, Tatum wrapped up the season averaging over 30 points, nearly 9 rebounds, and almost a steal and a block to go with that. Extremely impressive numbers if you ask me. But he just didn't do enough to remain in the discussions. That said, it can still be considered a snub, purely because of some really good two-way basketball. But as far as the voting is concerned, Jokic and Embiid just kept pulling away from both Tatum and the other early season favorite, Luka Doncic. Just look at that historic collapse that saw Dallas miss out on even the play-in tournament. This is the same team that was in the discussion for the top seed in the West. So what happened? It's very simple to explain. Luka Doncic got injured and then was playing through the pain barrier while only being 60 to 70% fit, in a season where he was required to score at least 30 points for the Mavs to win games at one point. It wasn't a surprise to see them completely fall away when Doncic stopped firing. In fact, his impact on the team was so big that even the arrival of a championship-winning point guard, Kyrie Irving, on the trade deadline couldn't save the Mavericks' season. So, when you look back at what the team was achieving from late 2022 to early 2023, you've got to give the Slovenian his flowers. It's not a joke. They were legitimate contenders for the top seed at one point. What an insane carry job. Which is why, if the criteria were how much a team is dependent on a superstar, then there was going to be only one winner, Luka Doncic. Unfortunately, injuries were very much responsible for this season falling through completely. Speaking of injuries, both Steph Curry and Kevin Durant had very valid MVP shouts up until their injuries. Age is just a number when you're talking about KD and Curry. The former teammates enjoyed a late career renaissance in the 2022-23 season, with Steph averaging nearly 30 points per contest, something that he's only managed on 2 other occasions in his career, not to mention the three-point shooting. The chef was really cooking teams from the range, averaging well over 42% from beyond the arc. And while that's more common in Steph's book, it'll never be something that we get used to seeing. The only reason the 4-time NBA champion got snubbed from the MVP award was injuries. You need to make a certain number of appearances to be considered in MVP discussions. That didn't happen for Curry, who played only 56 games throughout the regular season. And his former teammate, Kevin Durant, struggled on the sidelines too. Because if not for injuries, KD was having an outrageous campaign. In fact, he started the season with almost a dozen 25-point games or more. And by the time he got injured in February, KD was averaging a monster 29.7 points per game on 56% shooting. Do you know how freaking bizarre that is? But with less than 50 games under his belt, the voters also paid no attention to KD. So, from KD and Steph losing out on late career MVP awards, to Nikola Jokic not being allowed to do the three-peat, here are the NBA players that were snubbed in this year's MVP.